Welcome back. Congress this weekend averting a first ever U.S. default.
Lawmakers passing the bipartisan agreement to raise the debt ceiling. That agreement brokered by President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Here's a look at how Wisconsin's delegation voted.
Now, some Republicans have said they want McCarthy out as Speaker after working with Democrats. Here's Congressman Brian Steil, a McCarthy ally. Some Republicans have said they are then going to begin the conversation about removing House Speaker Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. How serious of a threat is that?
Actually, I think the House Republican Conference is quite unified. In fact, many people didn't believe that we would get any reforms when passing a debt ceiling, that at the end of the day, it would be business as usual in Washington. But the results are far different than that. We have substantive and meaningful conservative reforms in this bill. All of us would probably like more reforms in this bill than what we have. But I think I think everybody recognizes that there's substantive and meaningful reforms in this piece of legislation.
With that, do you still anticipate a motion to vacate coming to the floor if this does pass?
Any one person can call it. I don't think that's a productive move. I think having Republicans in the House unified is our best opportunity to rein in the reckless spending of the Biden administration. I think you'll actually see Republicans come together, in particular, as we go forward into the discussion of the appropriations bills, meaning the actual spending bills that will be drafted over the next 4 months. We have a lot of work ahead of us to carve out the reckless spending that we've seen over the past few years.
Congressman Roy and Bishop have been two of the most vocal discussing this. Do you think they won't bring anything to the floor if this passes?
You know, any member can bring that motion to the floor. I don't think that they will. I think at the end of the day, they recognize that this bill moves the ball forward. They would just like to see more reform. So would I. I just think there's a political reality when we only control 1/2 of the three branches of government.
Let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein. Hey, Rick, like always, good to see you.
You bet. Good to be with you.
All right. So does McCarthy actually face any threat of being removed as Speaker after all the debt limit stuff?
Not really. I mean, there's definitely rumblings around trying to oust him, but the fact is that he got a better deal than, in a lot of ways, he was entitled to get at all, because the debt ceiling just has to be raised. And the fact that he was able to get some concessions means he can point to actual policy progress for his members. And look, I think he emerges stronger from this, if anything. Yes, there's people rumbling, but a lot of people thought that, 5 months into his speakership, he might not be Speaker any longer. And that isn't a serious discussion right now. I think there's a general acknowledgement that he played his hand about as well as he could have. The White House viewed him as a honest negotiating partner. And look, in a negotiation in divided government, you don't get everything you want. I think he's able to walk away with some real wins.
Let's talk about the race for the White House 2024. Both Mike Pence and Chris Christie are expected to enter the race this week. What is that going to do for the growing Republican presidential candidate field?
Well, look, on one level, Trump says the more the merrier, because there's a theory out there, and it may not be a wrong one, that Trump supporters are who they are and that everyone else can divide up the rest of the electorate. I do think, though, this particular week is going to bring some really interesting dynamics. Chris Christie and Mike Pence may not seem similar, but they were both very loyal to Trump. Obviously, one as vice president, the other as an outside advisor who was brought in to help on debates and election strategy and the like. Both of them broke with the former president over his handling of the aftermath of the election, publicly as well as privately. And I think the idea that candidates like that will be in the field kind of changes the dynamics. You're not going to have people that are just fighting for the mantle of who can be as Trumpy as possible without the name. You're going to have people saying, look, what he did was wrong, and what he did was unacceptable, and what he did was dangerous, and that he might be dangerous going forward. That's different to my mind, and not clear how it plays out. Both Pence and Christie get into the race with significant baggage. A lot of Republicans are mistrustful of both of them, but they're substantial names with big resumes. They're likely to get on debate stages, and they might be looking to punch Donald Trump in the nose on a debate stage.
Rick, you just mentioned the debate, the first Republican primary debate here in Milwaukee in August. Trump has yet to commit, as we all know. How big of a deal is this first debate going to be?
I think it's a huge moment, and I think it tells you kind of how people line up and what their thinking is around the campaign, more than campaign spending or visits or anything else. And I think even the pregame around it becomes important, because you're right. There is no guarantee that Trump's going to show up. There's no guarantee that some of the candidates that we've been talking about for a long time will even qualify, depending on how many donations, what kind of polling threshold they need. The pressures on the RNC are enormous. And I think the stakes of the first debate in particular to define what this race really looks like are huge. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. There's going to be an enormous TV audience end of August around this, and a lot of interest in how people start choosing their lanes. And the first time that we'll see them all together in one place in this very intriguing race ahead.
Never a dull moment. ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, like always, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Up next, Pride Month at the Capitol.